Welcome back, everyone. Wade Boggs fan here with another video. Okay, today's video isn't a mail day. It's not necessarily a commentary video, definitely not a rant video. I guess it's just a thought video explanation. I'm not sure how you want to categorize it, but just thought I would do a video on why I like vintage baseball cards. Now, before I get into the reasons why I like vintage, I want to say that this video is not going to be a knock on or against modern cards. All right. It is not a video explaining why you should invest in vintage cards or to try to tell you why you should invest in or buy vintage cards. This is just a video that I thought I'd do on why I personally like vintage cards. And so hopefully you'll enjoy the reasons why I like vintage cards. But again, I like modern cards as well. So again, this is not a knock on modern versus vintage, which one's better and all that stuff, because I do like the modern cards as well. So the first reason why I like vintage is it goes back to my childhood. I've told the story here a couple of times. I started collecting in the late 70s, 78, 79. Early on, I had picked up, I think from my cousins, some 77s, maybe about 50 or so like that. But that's when I started collecting, and that just happens to be maybe toward the end of the quote-unquote vintage era, 79, 80, depending on who you talk to. But I remember even back then in those days, even into the early to mid 80s, I'd see a price guide or whatever, and rather than check out the current stars or current star prices or whatever, I remember going back and saying, "Oh man, look at that 64 Topps Pete Rose," or "Man, I'd love to have a 55 Mantle," or you name it. I even back then, which I guess technically wasn't vintage in 1983, but they were maybe 20-year-old cards. So I guess maybe not quite vintage, but that era of cards, I always found interesting. And so today, as a nearly 50-year-old, I like going back and getting those cards, especially now that I'm working on that vintage PSA collection. Right now, I'm working on the 78s and 79s, again, right when I started collecting. And it's just bringing back some good memories of when I started collecting and stuff like that. So I'm enjoying building that part of my collection and building on my vintage collection. So getting back to my childhood is one reason why I like vintage. The second reason why I like vintage, and I brought this up in a previous video about the reading and taking a look at the backs of baseball cards, and vintage cards give you an insight into the history of the game, both from the images of the players and the stats from back then. I don't think I really need to get into all of it because, again, I touched upon it in a previous video. So if you want to learn more about my thoughts there about the backs of cards and the history of the game through baseball cards, you can go check that video out. But for me, it's a way to look back at the great game of baseball through cardboard. So that's the second reason why I like vintage. The third reason why I like to collect vintage, or just like vintage cards in general, is especially for those cards that are pretty beat up. I guess to some extent the cards that have been kept in really, really good condition over the last 40, 50, 60 years. The story of maybe how they got kept in such great condition? Was it maybe an older collector back then, maybe someone's grandfather or whatever, was very meticulous, didn't put them in rubber bands, but put them in albums or in boxes where they didn't get damaged, and took very good care of them, which was rare back then. But more often, you have vintage cards that may look like, I have two examples here. I'm going to go with this one here for the first one. All right. Now, this is my 1978 Topps Eddie Murray rookie card. Now, I have recently purchased a PSA copy that's in better condition than this for my collection there that's going. But this is the one I've had since 1978. I pulled this from a pack at some point in 1978. Now, it's going to be hard to see on here. I don't have the zoom on and stuff, but I'm not sure if you can tell, but in addition to some creases and stuff, the card is a little warped. The reason why this card is a little warped and dinged on the corners and so on, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, but early on when I was collecting cards, now this didn't impact all of my cards, but a fair number at the time. I was down at a neighbor's house and I had my cards, and I think I showed it off. I had one of those baseball card carrier things that open up and had slots for different teams and stuff. Well, I had some of my cards in there. I think maybe in order by team, probably, most likely. Anyway, I was down at a neighbor's house where I grew up, and I don't know, we were just showing off cards or doing stuff and whatever, but I remember that his little sister, this was during the summertime, out in their backyard, had a little kiddie pool, and she was playing in the pool and stuff like that. And I can't remember exactly what happened, but I had my case open and it got bumped, whatever. I think it was an accident. I'm pretty sure it was an accident, not on purpose, but some of my cards fell in the kiddie pool and got wet. And even back then, I was like, oh my gosh, my cards. So God bless my mom. She did what she could right away, as best she could, to, I don't know if it was paper towels or whatever, put them on the card, put something heavy on them to try to soak up the water. But I'll go through some of my cards. Now, this one may not be the perfect example, but in some of my box of commons and stuff like that, you can clearly see where some of my cards have waves. And that's the story behind how that card got damaged in such a way. It's what happened to this card maybe before I owned it. So like this one, this 1964 Yogi Berra. It has multiple creases on it. Now, I picked this one up. I don't know if I paid for it. It was given to me from a different neighbor when I was younger, maybe about 10 years old. And these cards, a bunch of 64s, were in his family. I don't know if it was an uncle of his. I don't think it was his dad's, maybe a grandfather, something. But someone within his family in 1964 pulled this card. And most likely it was part of a pack that had a rubber band in it, or loosely thrown into a shoebox, or maybe it was traded. And, you know, that family member didn't get it out of a pack, but traded with a friend of his or whatever. But the history of a specific card is interesting. Today, and again, it's no knock on modern cards, but today, you open a nice card from a pack, immediately in a penny sleeve, immediately in a top loader, never to be touched by a human hand again. Pristine, keeping the corners perfect and all that stuff, the surface. You see people opening cards with surgical gloves just so they don't get any marks on them. A lot different. And again, I'm not disparaging or putting that practice down. I'm just saying it's different from the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. You know, we didn't look at these as investments. It was, wow, I got a Yogi Berra, or, oh, I have a so-and-so, but you have a Yogi Berra. Will you trade me for it, or will you do this for it? And So yeah, so the stories behind even individual cards, forget about the history of baseball. It's the stories behind a card, like, wow, what did this card go through before I got it? And sometimes it may be a boring history, sometimes it may be a somewhat interesting history that this got dumped in water. But that's one another reason, and you may laugh at this. I even chuckle myself, but those who are into vintage know that you can tell a vintage card by the smell. And I've even seen Facebook posts where someone would have, hey, someone's selling this 78 Eddie Murray rookie. How do I know if it's real or not? And there'll be some people say, smell the card. And it has a smell to it, whether it's the type of cardboard, the print, the fact that it was in a wax pack with gum. And when I say wax pack, wax is a general term used today, but obviously modern packs are machine sealed. Okay, they're not sealed with wax, like wax glue type like that. But you get, in fact, when I was doing my tribute to Joe Morgan, I was going through my 78s, 79s, 80s, 81s, and so on, and just going through because I didn't want to bother looking up the card number to see if I had the card number. So I just sat there and started thumbing through the cards. And as I was doing that, and I was moving, I could smell the cards, and it's different. It's I don't know. Again, and it also brought back memories of when I first collected, and it's the smell of vintage cards is different, and I don't know. Anyway, the next reason why I enjoy collecting vintage is it harkens back to a day, and again, I don't want to get controversial here or whatever, but it goes back to a day where of the innocence of collecting, that it wasn't so much about value or condition. It was who was on the card. Okay, so if you were a Yankees fan, you wanted to get every Yankee card, or if you liked a certain player or whatever back then, you didn't think, oh my gosh, I want to I want to get all the Mickey Mantles I can because in 40 years these are going to be worth something. That you just, back then, it wasn't something you thought about. You collected cards for the joy of the card and the player who was on it. I remember fairly young that probably this was, I want to say it was like 80, 81, 82, somewhere around there. Because I can probably tell based on the condition of my cards from those years, that I would flip. And if you're a newer collector and not familiar with flipping, what we would do is there would be a designated height on the wall, and you would put the card up to the wall, flat against the wall, and then let go. And just with the air and stuff, the card would tend to flip and fall on the floor. So the first one would do that. Then the second one would try to have their card flip on top of that card. And if you landed on any cards, you got those cards. And then you'd keep going back and forth. And it basically, you'd end up recirculating, especially if you only did it with one or two of your friends. If there was more, then you had a better chance maybe of getting different ones. But I'd find that, okay, I'd lose a couple cards, and then the next day or next week, whatever, I'd win some of them back because we only had so many cards. But it was fun to do. So just, again, the innocence of collecting back then, it was for different purposes. Again, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying it was different. It was more about the card than the condition or the value. The next to last reason why I enjoy collecting vintage is the design, the artwork on some of these vintage cards. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, with the modern technology, the refractor technology, the shine, the shimmer, all that stuff. I mean, there are some really cool cards that are currently being made. Don't get me wrong. But from an aesthetic, my personal view, again, this is just my personal view, the aesthetics of vintage cards, especially from, I would say, the 50s and older. Because once you get into the 50s and 60s and 70s, it was more photography than artwork. But even then, the photography, you're not going to get Stadium Club quality in a 1972 Topps card. Just the technology there was not. I mean, you didn't get 4K quality images. All right. So even then, when they switched over to photography, there'd be different ways that you could get different shadows or perspectives. Something would be in focus in the background and back. It would be less in focus and so on. I think there's a 73 Steve Garvey, something like that. That's really famous for his swinging pose, and in the background, the crowd is all blurred, but he's in focus and stuff, and it's a really interesting shot. But just have a couple quick examples here. I've showed these off in other videos, but the 1953 Topps Mickey Mantle. This was taken from a photograph, but then an artist did a rendering of it. It is, people talk about Project 2020 being artwork, and it is, okay. But this is vintage artwork. It was made to look as close to the photograph as possible, because back then, and I think Bowman found out in, was it 53 when they were doing the color photographs? It nearly bankrupted them because of the cost back then for color photography to put on baseball cards. So they had artists do artist renderings and stuff. So it's just a gorgeous looking card to me. Another example is a 52 Bowman. Again, Bowman came out with some wonderful designs of cards and players. This is a 1952 Bowman Stan Musial. And then the last one here is a 1956 Topps Warren Spawn. Try to get the glare out there. Okay. Again, just, I don't know, when there are surveys done, recent surveys of, the name your favorite card set, what's the best card design set? Typically, you're not going to get, 2017 Topps make it far in the round there, the round robin or the tournament, so to speak, that I've seen these do. You're going to see what rises to the top, and at the end, that the top 5, 6 sets, whatever, are most likely going to be all vintage, because people just love the design and the artwork of vintage cards. So the last reason why I guess I enjoy collecting vintage and vintage cards is, now I am going to get to the side of the investment side of things, and I have to give credit where credit is due, and this portion of this video I did get from some excellent comments made by the most recent podcast by Mike, Baseball Collector, and Bench Clear, The Golden Age of Cardboard. They did talk about modern prices versus vintage prices, and is vintage going up and all that stuff. So I can't claim credit for what I'm about to say here, but I got my ideas from them. But vintage represents more of a safe investment. Now, that's not to say that cards won't go up over time, maybe somewhat drastically, although the data didn't show it. That was on that they showed on that podcast and YouTube video. Whereas modern cards, and you've seen it in the last year here, especially for some of the rookies very young stars, their prices could shoot up, but then there's just as likely the opportunity or potential or the chance that their cards could come crashing back down. Heaven forbid they go into a multi-year slump, they get injured. Wouldn't want that on anyone, but it's more volatile. Modern cards are more volatile. So if you are in it for an investment, a low risk investment, vintage would be the way to go. Now, personally, when I buy a card, I don't necessarily look at it as, all right, I want to buy this card because I think in 5, 10, 15 years it could be worth more. If I buy a card that I like, and quite honestly, some of these 78, 79 PSA cards, if I spend $20 on one of them, I can almost guarantee that, especially if it's not a rookie card, if it's a third or fourth year of Joe Morgan, okay, even though he's a Hall of Famer, that 78 or 79 tops in a PSA 8 in 10 years, maybe $25 instead of 20. I mean, I realize that, and that's okay with me. So in terms of like the stock market, vintage is more of like investing in bonds, like government-backed, low return bonds. Your money's going to be relatively safe, okay, but you're not going to make huge returns. Where you want to make the huge returns is investing in high-tech, international funds or different things like that, where the reward may be really high, but so may be the risk. So for me, again, I'm more of a collector than an investor or flipper. So for me personally, I know that if I invest in vintage, chances are, if I go to sell any, I'm probably not going to lose any money. Now, there are going to be some fluctuations and stuff. And like I said, maybe if I pay $20 for a 78 Joe Morgan in a PSA 8, and 5 years from now I go to sell it, and heaven forbid, I may get $18 for it. Okay, no big deal. Low dollar cards. When you get into the high dollar cards, especially the rookie cards for vintage, there could be some fluctuation there, and a slight chance that if things build up over time, there could be some minor correction, and if you sell in the wrong time, you may lose a little bit. But generally speaking, buying vintage in terms of investment is a safe investment that I'm not worried about spending money on vintage because I know the values for the most part are going to stay there or slowly over time go up. So there you have it, my, I guess, 7 reasons why I enjoy collecting vintage cards. So I'd be interested to know if you collect vintage, and if you do, why do you like vintage cards? Maybe there's some of the ones that I've mentioned. Maybe there were other reasons that I did not mention. So I'd love to learn about that. So before I go, I want to go over the answer to the last video's trivia question, and I have a new trivia question. So let's get into trivia time. So the question from the last video was, who was the first National League pitcher to throw 6 wild pitches in one game? And I did give a hint that it wasn't a Hall of Famer, but was a good pitcher in his day. Someone, I think, Googled it, and they gave a couple different players, but one of them was listed in there, so someone got it right. The answer is J.R. Richard in 1979, and I believe his career was cut short from some illness, I believe. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but he was a great pitcher in the 70s. He actually, that year in 1979, he threw 19 wild pitches for the season, and which was one short of his career high of 20 in 1975. So he had a little bit of wildness in him. But actually, and I think this was Eric Fourleaf Cards who had listed J.R. Richard as part of the answer, and he also mentioned Phil Niekro. And Phil Niekro, 4 months later, in 1979, after J.R. Richard, also tied the record with 6 wild pitches in one game, and with Niekro being a it escapes me now. But the type of pitcher he was, no wonder that he had some wild pitches. So, and I know that's going to come back to me. It's not forkball. I don't know why I'm drawing a complete blank, but knuckleball. There you go. Knucklehead. Yeah, he was a knuckleball pitcher, and once that leaves the pitcher's hand, it just wobbles all over the place. So I could see wild pitches. So Phil Niekro tied the record 4 months later. Okay, so here is the new trivia question for this video. You're probably going to get this one. All right, it's not quite a softball question. It may make you pause and think, but you should be able to get it. Of these pitchers, Randy Johnson, Nolan Ryan, Tom Seaver, and Bob Feller, which one never had 300 or more strikeouts in a season? Now, obviously, you can Google it, look at their stats, and just run down and go, oh, yes, oh, no, or whatever. But before you look it up, just take a guess. Most of you will probably get it. But you have to give easy ones every once in a while. So, all right, that's all I have. I know this is a little bit longer video than I normally try to do, but I don't know. I just felt like doing this type of video today. So, hope you enjoyed. That's all I have. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.